Good morning, friends. Thank you so much for coming back this morning. We're going to dive right in. You know that you are, in fact, in the Gather and Grow that's talking about embracing change and transitions, right? If you didn't know, that's where you are, embracing change and transitions. And we will turn it over in just a moment to our friend Susan Larson, who will lead us through some great material. But we're going to start with kind of centering exercise where, and I believe they all have this, right? Most of you have this list of quotes.
Declaration for a Changing Life. Everyone should have one.
So these are quotes from Julia Cameron, who's very well known for writing The Artist's Way and a series of books. So we're going to read these quotes, and I would like us to treat it as a kind of a quieting exercise, but to pay attention as we read these, and you can look at them and see if any words or phrases stand out to you in these quotes. Okay, and then we'll just talk about it very briefly afterwards. You'll hear the different quotes in our different voices up here, so just pay attention. See if a word or a phrase jumps out at you and make note of that. A change for the good is still a change. Often we have held a shimmering dream that danced tantalizingly just beyond our reach. When suddenly that dream is ours, we may find we must work to enjoy it. We must consciously thaw our numbed emotions and allow ourselves the tingling sensation that our success is real. The moment we had so looked forward to is now at hand. Often our friends are as lost as we are. They too do not know how to behave. We must practice a forgiving heart toward ourselves and others as we blink uncertainly in the spotlight. We must seek out those who can love us before, during, and after.
Conscious living invites ritual, the sacred times and transactions we build into our daily life. A ritual may be as small as lighting a candle for our meals, listing our gratitudes daily, or even walking the dog. A ritual can be as humble as the weekly writing of postcards to friends. Regular, repetitive, and soothing rituals become the stepping stones through our days. They offer a gentle structure in times of flux. We endow rituals with meaning, and rituals in turn bestow meaning to us.
The door to the future may stick when we try to open it. Not all transitions are easy or graceful. Sometimes our past is done before our future seems quite ready. We are caught in the corner of in-between, a limbo that feels awkward and uncomfortable. At times like this, we must practice the art of containment. Soon enough, the future will unfold, the door will swing open, and the way will be clear. In the meanwhile, we can consider the distance we have come already, the lessons we have learned, and the chapters closed. By pausing to appreciate our growth, we find ourselves more restful than restless. The wheel will turn and find us ready.
Any words or phrases that you underlined or put a check mark by? We won't spend long on this, but as we're thinking about transitions, did anything stand out for you? Yes?
Regular, repetitive, and soothing rituals become the stepping stones through our days. They offer a gentle structure in times of flux.
Do you have an example of that in your life?
Oh, yes.
Maybe.
We're going to be here for a half hour.
Okay, never mind.
Well, right, you might not have an example of it, but as I read, it's like it's a thought for the future when transitions come, right?
The phrase, the door to the future may stick, but we try to open it, grabbed me.
Yeah.
Love that, yes.
I find that lighting a candle is very helpful to settling you down at the end of the day.
Calming. It's a beautiful act.
Lori, I think Barbara had another thought here.
Well, there was a major disruption in my health, and my love of scuba diving and sailboat racing and being in and under the water on top of it came to a pretty quick halt, and I am blessed that I'm here to have that problem. That's the way
Yes, we are.
Anyone else before
Yeah.
we turn it over to Susan?
I didn't underline anything, but I think that maybe everybody is going through change and transition, whether they know it or not.
Amen and amen.
Yeah.
And, you know, Susan is going to carry this theme on. I'm going to turn it over to her, but I want to encourage you to take this, and you might sit quietly later today even and reread these quotes, and something else may jump out at you. So that might be a nice exercise, even for later today.
Thank you, Nita. Well, a pleasant surprise this week, a colleague of mine let me know that she has been exploring the Church of the Palms with her husband, Rick Miners. Jerry Sedler and Rick Miners are with us today, and they're the authors of a book that is really another wonderful tool, Don't Retire, Rewire, and she's donating a copy to Lori to circulate here. So I'm glad to have you with us today. We're going to continue to use the resource, Life is in the Transitions, Mastering Change at Any Age, Bruce Feiler's book today. And what I'd like to do is kind of go back just a minute and recap a couple of important definitions, because today we're going to build on last week where we were setting the stage and kind of widening our lens. And today what we're going to do is we're going to add to this. You're going to dive a little deeper, and then you're going to personalize today and looking at some disruptors and lifequakes in a few minutes. But first, let's go back and look at what constitutes a life transition. It's a change or situation, an event that happens or you make happen. So remember, it can be elected or unelected, that alters your life. We think of change most often as situational, but it can range from the simple and mundane, like maybe you take a different way to Church of the Palms or to the grocery store, or it can be a defining event. A transition is the psychological internal process and path we take to adjust to change or changes, okay? And we talked a little bit about the difference is that today, when we look at these terms, we know that we live in a non-linear world, that we used to think of a transition process as one and done, and that it would follow a pathway that could be predicted. And we talked a little bit about Gail Sheehy's passages, stages of grief, Erik Erikson's stages. Everything was stages, you know, and it always went, from left to right, okay? And it was even predictable at a certain age and stage this was going to happen. And we know that's not happening for us and the other generations around us today. So what I'd like to do is take this and add this. This is, yeah. Isn't that more accurate? Yeah. It says 3-step transition diagram. And this has been around a long time. People like Jerry and Rick and I, we know that William Bridges, way back in the late 70s and 80s, you know, he had a 3-step transition process. And that was a gift because he gave us a base to build on. But what writers like Bruce Feiler, Chip Conley with the Modern Elder Academy, what so many of my colleagues now do, is we update it for the turbulent, unpredictable times that we live in, and the pace of change has increased. So if we think of that we are going to go through endings. That's the first step, and that's on the right. And it may be elected or unelected. In other words, it might be an external kick or it might be internal. Then a lot of us move into that very familiar territory, denial. Okay. And we find that that happens in the grief process, in many different processes that we go through emotionally. And is indicated here, there may be emotional bath, it may be up and down. But then we move into an area that used to be called the neutral zone. But they begin to call it the messy middle. We don't know what's going to happen. Some people call it the fertile void. Some people call it liminal space. The in-between, the not knowing, but the chance to test out, to step back, to reassess, to look at things through a new lens. So the messy middle will be different. It will be kind of a roller coaster. At times we'll feel competent. At times we'll feel like we're in the soup. And other times we may be really hunting for what are the threads? What can I begin to put together? Okay, what steps can I begin to take? And then we move into new beginnings. And that's always kind of mixed too, because we're not, it may be new territory, we may be new at something, we're not the master of something, but we have a chance to become, we have a chance to take flight, find a flow, and perhaps show up differently and write a new chapter. So the idea of beginning to take steps, and they may or may not come in order, and we may find that we keep circling back. How many of you handle uncertainty or not knowing very well? Okay. Sometimes I have people that say, you know, like, oh, I sort of like, you know, when things are up for grabs and, you know, the newness. Well, that messy middle, if people really, really like structure, and people really like to have established ritual, or they have a need to be really good at something, or have a lot of knowns in their life, they can expect that the messy middle may have some discomfort or more discomfort. But people who might be more go with the flow, and they may have experienced uncertainty before, they may find the messy middle not quite so troubling. I worked with somebody who I found very refreshing because forced to leave a position, he looked at it as an opportunity to take some of his savings and do something with that open period of time before he jumped back into full-time work. Some people might panic and say, oh, I can't possibly do that because I have to, you know. So people treat this period, this messy middle, in different ways. Very often we can find ourselves saying, gee, it's not supposed to be like this. And I'm reminded of Steve's sermon last month, the one where he entitled it From a Sprint to a Marathon. And he used the phrase, sometimes life puts you into a different marathon race than you signed up for. Anybody identify with that? Okay. Life wasn't supposed to go this way. So to continue in terms of equipping us, I'd like to introduce two new terms that Bruce Feiler coined as he went through his own transitions, and then he went through researching and writing about transitions. You have a handout on disruptors, and I'm just going to quickly hit on this and then give you an opportunity to actually play with this a little bit. A disruptor is an event or an experience that interrupts the everyday flow of one's life, a deviation from daily life, and they could be voluntary or involuntary. They might be good or bad, personal or collective, and research shows that we can expect to experience 36 or more in a lifetime. Okay. Good news, bad news, right? Okay. But as you can see from the list, there's some positive things on the disruptor list, as well as those that maybe those that you would not elect. They are broken into 5 categories: love, identity, beliefs, work, and body. And one of the things about disruptors is you can think of a disruptor as kind of a life shakeup. Now, when several disruptors come together, you have a life quake. It's a forceful burst of change in one's life that leads to a period of upheaval, transition, and renewal. Life quakes often converge when 2 or more disruptors pile up, and you can sometimes feel overwhelmed. What they found with research when they were putting together the book Life is in the Transitions is that sometimes if we're vulnerable, if we may be at a point of weakness, if we may have sort of hit the wall. Have any of you ever had that term come out of your mouth? Okay. Then it's very common that that's a time when we're more likely to experience life quakes, where 2 or more things happen. What's an example of a collective life quake that all of us in this room have recently experienced?
Pandemic.
Anybody? COVID? Okay. And a hurricane? Okay, good. And as we know, with both of those things, hurricane, COVID, there may have been multiple disruptors to our life on many levels, okay? And some of them may have been personal, and some of them may have been in the collective. It may have involved our whole community, our whole neighborhood, our whole city. And in the case of COVID, it was obviously a worldwide event. Then there is the life quake that's personal. In his book, Bruce Feiler talks to us about his life quake, which was a major health event, unexpected. His father's own demise, and his father was somebody he looked up to. In addition to that, his livelihood as a writer and his career and his finances were not in a good place. So how many disruptors do you count? Yeah, he had 3 or 4 that were all converging at one time. And I guess he felt like he needed to come up with a term to describe what he was going through. But that is indeed an example of a life quake. So what I'd like to invite you to do today is take maybe about 5 minutes and look at this list of disruptors and also this term life quake. And what are the ones that you would note that you have experienced or are experiencing? And then we'll come back together. I'd love to give you like 3 to 5 minutes just to begin to tally, because this is your first glance at this. Hopefully you've all had a chance to note some, and this is your takeaway so you could begin to perhaps give it more thought during the week as your time permits. But I'd be interested in your initial reaction in terms of how many you found that you were noting, and any surprises on here? Anyone? Yes.
I had a major life quake in 2006. I finally got the kids raised and decided what I wanted to do with my life, went back to school and graduated from nursing school and took a job. And at the same time, we bought a condo where our children live in a ski resort in California. So we added a second residence with a whole bunch of paperwork. And within a month after I started the job, one of my parents' friends called me and said, we were at a restaurant with your parents and they cut up their credit card at the restaurant. And I realized both of my parents had started into dementia.
Wow.
So the reason I'm saying that is yesterday we were getting ready to have company, and I was moving boxes and boxes of paper from one room to the other, and those are all from that year. Magazines I never read, paper that I didn't have time to file, things that are probably valuable that I just had to stick aside so I could keep myself above water. And so that life quake is technically still going on. Yeah.
Good point. A very good point. Yeah, it reverberates, right? Yeah, the afterquake. Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else? Either disruptors, life quake, anything that you noticed? Yes.
I didn't realize how many of these, till I looked at them, that we had been through. I mean, I knew we had been through them, but it's kind of like maybe I ought to be in an institution or something. But, I mean, seriously, it's like...
Or we put you on Survivor, right? Okay, yeah. Well, we are people of experience, and one of the things that we realized is we've weathered a lot of storms. We've had a lot of disruption. Yeah.
I actually have a question. We were talking about a couple of things that were piling up in our lives at different times. Like, how much time could have passed that it would be considered in a life quake? So 6 months later, the next thing happened, or is it's probably not that neat?
I don't think it is, Lori, because sometimes it is, you know, like it is many things that you get where you hit the wall because it's the last straw, and he talks about that. So I think, yeah, it could be a succession of things, and your resilience, your ability to bounce back, yeah. And I think you used an interesting term, keeping your head above water. We talk about, you know, just treading water, yeah. Just trying to take each day, yes. Anybody else in terms of your first initial reaction looking at this list?
6 years ago, my husband and I went through an earthquake that's continuing today when our son moved in with us, and he had addictions and was ill. But I really liked what she shared there because I have papers that aren't getting filed. I have things that are not getting done because I'm trying to keep my head above water with health care and with things that have to be done. And it kind of gave me a reassurance that I can get through this because it'll eventually get done. It will be, and it's kind of a continuation.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, collectively it is really helpful for us to realize I'm not the only one, and we can often learn from each other and get support from each other.
I just want to say that we handle our difficulties the best that we can, but I'm looking under LifeQuake where you have your deploying skills that will bring us to renewal. What kind of skills can you share with us?
Okay. That's really a nice lineup for next week. We are actually going to be looking at, Filer gives us a 7-part toolkit, and I think it's a helpful way to look at it. We're also going to look at a diagram in just a couple of minutes that is another thing that's helpful in terms of our thinking and being able to shape how we look at things to move forward. Okay? Good question.
This is more of a question, but I think probably 100, 200 years ago, people were much more used to disruptions, and they didn't have to do exegesis on them or whatever we want to call it. It's like losing a child was sort of a normal thing, you know, in illness or birth or anything. And we consider many of those kinds of things disruptions because we're so used to a level of control and economy that people haven't always had. So, I mean, not that those things weren't painful, but they just expected them more than I'm kind of astonished. I mean, I look in the mirror and think, what happened whose body's in there? You know, where did that come from?
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Sybil. I'm going to move us.
I'm probably going through major disruptions right now and a life quake. And because we're at Church of the Palms, I will tell you that every disruption I've had and every life quake, if we go deeper with God in prayer, that is where we find our help, we find our solutions, we find our strength. And so for me, every hard time has led to a deepened faith and greater thankfulness to God.
Thank you. In the work of stepping back and reassessing when there are endings in the messy middle and when we have these things happen in our lives, many of us will go inward. And we will also need a more inner locus of control where we're living from the inside out. And so it's very common that people will deepen their faith journey, and they will draw in terms of their spiritual life and their beliefs, and they will perhaps choose to do it also in community. So thank you. Yeah. I'd like to just add one other thing. During the week, would invite you to think about the disruptors that you've identified and how are you equipped to handle them? And are you still handling disruptors? And to think about your response, how you've adapted, what you've learned, and maybe where you still feel like you need more skills, more support, you know, in terms of as you've dealt with many of the things that you've noted here. So to give you a chance this week to think through, you know, what's working? What am I good at? What have I learned? What sort of my style? And then where maybe might I like more help? What are some of my questions? One of the last things that I'd like to introduce is this concept of shape-shifting. When we're trying to get a sense of more meaning and kind of stepping back, and we're trying to rebalance our lives, particularly after a life quake or maybe several disruptors, we will again probably be thinking of that three-step transition process. And shape-shifting, these three things are sort of, in terms of a balanced life as we mature, important things for us to be aware of. The first is agency, and that means our sense of self, our autonomy, freedom, our sense of confidence, creativity, our sense of what we can and cannot control. You may have heard the term self-efficacy, that sense of believing that I can overcome, I can problem solve, I have the coping mechanisms, or I know how to reach out for support. There's also a focus sometimes on belonging, that we may feel like we need to focus more on our relationships and family and friends and community, and that we need to seek and give support and nurture. And the last one is cause, And that's where we may feel like we want to explore and rebalance what we're called to do, our commitment, a sense of purpose and a direction, maybe beyond ourselves. And that we call generativity, when we give to other generations or people beyond ourselves. And we're going to invite you to look at this and values in the coming week as well, which may help you zero in on things in terms of where do I go when I'm trying to relook at sort of the direction and meaning in my life. If we were to give a sort of a quick idea of each of these, agency is about me, okay, and self. Belonging is about we. Cause is about thee, beyond self, and maybe in conjunction with others, the we. As we look at this juncture with disruptors and life quakes, we may need to ask ourselves, what is it that gives my life meaning? A reason to get up in the morning? And how does that influence the story of my life? So you have on the back of your quote from Julia Cameron. We are offering to have you as a takeaway look at your values this week. And our values are our stake in the sand, our principles, what we stand for. And they may shift in priority and focus throughout our lifetime. This is a very simple list. You can find all kinds of lists of values in any number of books and online. But we wanted to give you kind of a simple one. And you'll notice the term that I just used, generativity, is here in the first column. And if that's not a familiar term to you, you might just note it's basically giving back, giving particularly in terms of doing something beyond self. But this week, it might be helpful to think about your values and sort of tally them. And when we were meeting, and Anita, Lori, and I, Lori says, okay, I'm excited to do this, but why am I doing this? Okay, all right, good question. When we look at our values, one of the things that we start to see is what's shifted. Has anything changed? Would I have filled this out the same way 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago? Has anything shifted in priority? We may notice some themes. And we may notice that there's some things that are about agency, belonging, or cause. We may also notice that we have a lot of values that are important to us, you know, that we're really trying to satisfy a lot of things. And then what we may have to do is say, can I say, when push comes to shove, what are maybe the top 5 to 8 things that are really important for me to have in my life? And the last thing is, if we look at our values currently, we can say, am I living my life according to the values that I say are most important? When we talk about aging faithfully, when we talk about being authentic as we age, the values are really one of the things that help us in terms of direction and meaning. Okay. Thank you. And next week, we look forward to coming back. If you would like to bring the values exercise, that would be great. We will be looking at the 7-part toolkit, and we have a couple of other things in store. Have a great week.